Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?
Let us pray. Amen.
On behalf of the USPTO Military Association, welcome to the 2016 Memorial Day observance at Alexandria National Cemetery. I want to recognize our speakers today, Commissioner for Patents Drew Hirschfeld, along with decorated combat veterans Congressman Steve Russell from Oklahoma and retired Marine Brigadier General William Weiss, as well as our special guest Bill Jones, Commander of the Veterans of Foreign Wars, Post 609, Scott Bruner from the National Cemetery Administration in Quantico, USPTO Deputy Director Russ Slifer, USPTO Chief of Staff Vikram Iyer, USPTO Chief Administrative Officer Fred Steckler, and USPTO Executive Committee. Special thanks to Sergeant Brian Thompson, Alexandria Police Department Special Events, the U.S. Army Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps, the Air Force Color Guard, and retired Colonel Scott Patnode, our bugler. Please welcome Commissioner for Patents Drew Hirschfeld.
We're here, of course, to gather and remember and honor our country's fallen warriors. I wanted to thank the USPTO's Military Association, the UMA, for putting on this event. You're one of several phenomenal affinity groups at the USPTO. Of course, the UMA focuses on supporting our veterans and educating our staff, and I certainly want to highlight the educating as well, because I think events like this are very helpful in helping us learn more about our veterans. It's noteworthy that a significant portion of the USPTO, about 20% of the PTO, which is 2,200 employees, are veterans. That's a phenomenal number. That's the highest percentage of veterans of any federal agency. I think that deserves a round of applause. I'm not a veteran myself. As you heard, I am a huge supporter of the UMA. I certainly appreciate and recognize the sacrifices that all of our veterans have made in keeping our country safe and secure. Our military's efforts continue to preserve and protect the many freedoms and opportunities that we enjoy in the United States. Many of our employees still serve in the National Guard or reserves, and many of those employees are currently serving away from their families during this Memorial Day weekend. So we should certainly keep them in our thoughts, and we should not take for granted the privilege that their service affords us as we gathered in a hallowed place like this to remember and honor our fellow citizens who made the ultimate sacrifice. If you're a veteran, whether you served during a time of relative peace or during an officially declared war or conflict, it's likely that you lost a friend who served with you, whether it was due to hostile fire, illness, or accident. Those losses obviously affect the families of service members who do so much to support our veterans. I hope through events like this, you'll feel comforted and supported and help keep the memories of your lost friends alive. I encourage you to share stories of their service and sacrifice with others, not only on this Memorial Day, but certainly on every other day of the year. I know that's what General Weiss will do in a few minutes as he tells us about his wartime experience leading Marines in battle in Vietnam, and I'm looking forward to hearing his story and also Representative Russell's reflections of his time leading Army troops in Iraq and other countries. Also, I hope you will join Americans this Monday afternoon at 3 o'clock for the National Moment of Remembrance. This is a time legislated by Congress and proclaimed by President Obama to reflect silently for a minute as we join together to give our thanks to those who have given their lives in service to our nation. And while we remember and honor them, let us never forget that freedom is not free. I'm grateful that in each generation, brave citizens like General Weiss, Representative Russell, and all our USPTO veterans will continue to volunteer to support our Constitution as members of our armed forces, men and women who are willing to fight and die, if necessary, to defend our freedom. liberties, and our way of life, and to ensure the future of our children and our great nation. At the USPTO, we do spend a lot of time celebrating and honoring invention. Just recently, within the last couple weeks, we had a National Inventors Hall of Fame induction ceremony where a number of the nation's top inventors were inducted. The master of ceremonies at that event spent a lot of time talking about what would life be like if these people didn't invent what they did, and it was certainly a way to honor them. And you have inventions like the injector for the EpiPen or the software that runs the internet. And I found that to be really interesting. We all sat and contemplated what would life be like without those inventions. Well, as I stand here today and I think what would life be like without all our veterans and those who sacrificed, it's on a completely another level, and it's something that we should certainly spend a lot of time honoring. So thank you to all our veterans. My thoughts to all of you who have lost people in service, and thank you very much.
Commissioner Hirschfield, thank you. Director Slifer and General Weiss, thank you for your distinguished service and protecting me when I was a little guy. I appreciate it. And to all of you from the USPTO, thanks for protecting American property and innovation. What you do escapes notice, I'm sure, on a daily basis, but the importance of it is monumental. As a small businessman who owns Two Rivers Arms, a rifle manufacturing company, we filed trademarks and we've had to defend our ideas. And it was because of folks like you we were able to do that. So I want to say thanks to your day-in work that you do to protect American property. As I reflect back on Memorial Day, it's always a very special time for me. And I also, before I do that, I want to thank our great color guard and obviously the great soldiers of the 3rd Infantry that just do such magnificent work in maintaining our honor and our heritage. And so let's give a round of applause to them. Thank you. One of the most influential men in my life as a boy and even into adulthood was my great-grandfather, Jack Chamberlain. He had 3 brothers, and all of them served in the First World War. He was the youngest of the 4. He didn't go to France. He delivered Dodge quarter-ton trucks to ports so that they could ship them to France, but his other 3 brothers did go, and they all served in the First World War. Unfortunately, his next older brother, Frank Chamberlain, didn't come home. On October 22nd, 1918, he was killed in action outside of Cambrai in the offensives that just a couple of weeks later would end the First World War. He was deeply impacted by that and affected by that, as you would think anyone losing a loved one. His biggest concern was that his memory somehow would fade into obscurity. Frank was 19 when he was killed, as so many are, young. Soldiers that I lost in Iraq, many of them 19. And as you think about it, oftentimes you might find their mementos in some estate sale or garage sale. They never married, they never raised families, never had children. There was no one to care about their heritage or any of their ambitions, their laughter, their dreams, all of those things. Instead, it was left to siblings who at some point eventually die, and a family doesn't even know who those people were. And so their mementos just escape, and people see their decorations, their photographs, who they were, their life. As we look out into the cemetery today, it was these here, like our ancestors, that preserved our union and kept us together. The last time I saw my great-grandfather, I always remember being with him looking at a flaking picture of his brother and reflecting on that, and I would look at the mementos that were sent by his colleagues or fellow warriors who managed to get his uniform items, some of them, and some other items that they gave to my great-grandfather that were mailed to him after he died. And I always remember examining those as a kid, wanting him to share the stories and relate those things to him. In August of 1989, I was proud to bring my oldest daughter now, but my firstborn, and he got to see his great-great-granddaughter. He had 62 descendants before he passed in his 90s. And as he held her, and we took pictures, before I left, he said, "Before you go, I want to give you something." And I was airborne soldier stationed in Alaska at the time, my first tour in the Army. And so I waited, and he came out with a cigar box. And in it, it had a lot of things very personal to him. And I want to share some of those with you. One of them was a flaking picture of my Uncle Frank that I remember growing up and seeing as a kid. And then in the cigar box was my Uncle Frank's pipe, his Meerschaum pipe that he carried the day he was killed in action in the trenches and in the assault to try to carry the German positions. There was also the collar insignia and the items from his uniform. His dog tags would have been Canadian because unlike his three brothers, he couldn't wait until the U.S. finally got into the war and he ran off to Canada to go serve. And so I remember when he handed me these things in this box, and I said, "Grandpa, I can't take those. I can't take those. Those are your brothers." He said, "You will, because I know you'll keep his memory alive." And that's what it's about. Those of us that have borne the scars of battle, we knew our friends. We knew their laughter, their dreams, their ambitions, what they fought for. And as long as we live, so do they. As long as we are, so are their memories. And it's incumbent upon us as we go from generation to generation. None of my kids knew my great-grandfather. Only one met him and didn't know it, being only several months old. But all of them know my Uncle Frank, and they will keep his memory and his stories alive. He's buried in France. I have a picture of his headstone in my office where all of these things hold a place of honor. And so I want to challenge you today. Memorial Day is not about barbecue, some big sale at the car lot. It's not about boating. It's not about any of those things. But we're grateful that all of those things we can participate in on Memorial Day, and we should. But let's never forget the sacrifices that have been made and that real people gave up their hopes and their dreams to defend our liberty. It is an honor for me to be with you here today, and it is an honor to have served. God bless you all.
It's appropriate that we stand here today because this is the day that we remember them. It's the motto of an organization I belong to. I belong to many different veteran organizations. The one closest to my heart is an organization called the 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, also known as the Magnificent Bastards, an outfit that I commanded in Vietnam. We remember them, and we remember the veterans that went on before us. My father, who served in World War I as an Army sergeant, infantry, was wounded in gas. As our great-grandfathers and those before them fought at places like Bunker Hill, New Orleans, Gettysburg, St. Mihiel, Pearl Harbor, Normandy, Iwo Jima, the Chosin Reservoir, the Pusan Perimeter, places like Dido, Ia Drang Forest, many names most of us would not even know of, places like Fallujah, Ramadi, and the Americans that today defend our freedom throughout the world. Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, Coast Guard, and a number of those in civilian uniform that also support this nation throughout the world in defense of our freedom and the freedom of many, many future citizens of this country and throughout the world. You know, it wasn't the lawyer that gave us the right to freedom of trial, for a fair trial. And it wasn't the reporter or the editor that gave us freedom of the press. It wasn't the law, it wasn't the preacher that gave us freedom to worship as we please in any way that we please or not if we please. No, it was the soldier, the sailor, the Marine, the airman, and untold civilians, Coast Guard, that supported them throughout all the wars in our history and stand in the vanguard of liberty today throughout the world. I had the privilege of knowing many of these young men who gave their lives in defense of our country. One nearest to my heart was a Marine named John M. Malnar. He happened to be my sergeant major in Vietnam for almost a year. When I first met him, he was on his third tour, or just finishing up his third tour in 1967. But before that, he was born in the 20s in a little coal mining town that most of you have never heard of, called Sawyerville, Illinois, very close to the Mississippi River, about 50 miles southwest of St. Louis, Missouri. His father was an immigrant from Yugoslavia, present-day Croatia, present-day, as was his mother. His father could hardly speak English, but he fought in the United States Army as a volunteer and was wounded in World War I. He had an older brother named Eugene, who was already in the Marine Corps, fighting in the Pacific, when John, at the age of 17, enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1943. And as a young 17, 18-year-old, he made the assault amphibious landings in Saipan, Tinian, and Okinawa. He stayed in the Marine Corps. I guess he found a home there. And he never married, because I believe he was married to the Corps and to the men he served with, the men and the women that he served with. John was a very interesting man. When he was but a sergeant in 1950, in September, he accompanied the Marines that made the assault landing at Incheon, Korea, the turn that defeated the army of North Viet, I get my Korea and my Vietnams mixed up, but was critical in defeating the army of North Korea that invaded the South. The first day of the landing on 15 September 1950, John was a sergeant, a patrol leader, and he was leading his company up a ravine, but they were stopped because the ravine had a block at the exit points, barbed wire and landmines, and the enemy was able to fire at them from the high ground that surrounded this ravine. They had to blow those obstacles before they could fight their way out. John and another Marine volunteered to do that. They worked their way up, and despite heavy enemy fire, they were successful in inserting Bangalore torpedoes under the obstacle and blowing it. The other Marine was killed in this action. John survived, and for that he received his first medal, which was a Bronze Star with me. 3 days later, John's company, part of a tank infantry force, was moving south towards the capital city of Korea, Seoul, Korea. He was in the vanguard with his company when they were taken under fire from high ground to the right and left along the road, and they were pinned down by enemy fire. John, without hesitation, moved forward and without orders, jumped up onto one of the lead tanks, tried to communicate with the tank commander, but he couldn't because the tank infantry phone on the rear had been shot away. But he loaded and fired the external 50 caliber machine gun, putting accurate heavy fire on some of the enemy positions that blocked their way, causing them to pin down and enabling the rest of his company to assault and open up that particular obstacle. For that, he was awarded his first Silver Star. A few days after that, on the outskirts of Seoul, Korea, in a battle for the capital, John was in the vanguard of his company, leading a patrol that took the point of his company. And as the forward elements of his patrol moved under a railroad trestle, they came under heavy fire from enemy positions on the other side of the railroad trestle. The first 5 or 6 Marines in his patrol were badly wounded. John, being back, without hesitation, ran forward, grabbed a Browning automatic rifle that one of the wounded Marines had, and several bandoliers carrying the magazines loaded with BAR ammunition. And he fired that BAR at enemy positions, and in so doing, he had the enemy direct all the fire at him, which enabled the able-bodied men on his patrol to pull the wounded back. However, he paid a pretty hard price for that. He was badly wounded with several rounds, 3 of which entered his left leg. It took him a year to recover from that, and from then until the day he died, John had to wear a boot with 2.5 inches of sole in order to walk. Somehow, he finagled the authorities to keep him in the Marine Corps, which was unheard of in those days because his wounds should have resulted in a discharge, a medical discharge. But somehow he worked his bolt, as we used to say. He was a good non-commissioned officer, and I'm sure any of you that have served in enlisted grade know about that. He stayed on active duty and served in various endeavors, including the different training exercises. And when the war in Vietnam finally broke out and we first started putting ground troops there in 1965, he was one of the first to volunteer. And he stayed in Vietnam until the day he was killed in action in 1966. I was fortunate that at the time I took over a battalion that had been badly decimated in previous action against regular North Vietnamese Army troops in the demilitarized zone of the South Vietnam, that I had him as my sergeant major. He had joined just about 3 weeks before I did. As a matter of fact, when I joined, he was in the rear being treated for another wound. I forget whether it was his 3rd or 4th. But believe me, putting together a battalion that had been pretty well shot up with 5 brand new company commanders, the previous battalion commander had been wounded, the previous executive officer had been killed, many key personnel were gone, but it was mainly John played an extremely important role because of his experience and his desire to serve as both a mentor to me and the troops under us, as well as guiding us in many, many things with his combat experience behind him. He was able to assist us in training while we were actually engaged in combat. The reserve company was always going through some type of training that was appropriate to the area that we fought in, whether it be crossing streams without going to a fording point or by entering a village without going through a path. There were many things that he helped us train for the various battles in which we took part. And we took part in a number of battles during the 8 months that we were together. The last battle lasted 3 days. It was called the Battle of Dido. It was a brutal battle. We were thrust into an area outside our tactical area of responsibility to stop what we've later found out was an attempt by an enemy division, the 320th North Vietnamese Army Division, to assault and destroy Dong Ha Combat Base, which would have been a tremendous blow not only to the military situation in Vietnam, but it would have been a tremendous political victory for the enemy, which had failed both at Khe Sanh and in the other battles of the Tet of 1968. We didn't know it at the time, but our very understrength battalion, about 650 foxhole strength, fought an enemy division, all 3 regiments of an enemy division, the 320th. And we fought them for 3 days, and finally they withdrew. We didn't know it at the time, but we had conducted what in military parlance they called a very successful counteraction that prevented the enemy from carrying out his mission. And in doing so, we saved Dong Ha Combat Base and hundreds, maybe thousands of American lives. It was very costly. Of this little over 600 Marines, foxhole strength, we had 81 killed. We had 297 medically evacuated, and practically every other Marine that was still standing was at least slightly wounded and patched up and put back in combat. John Malnar died during the last firefight of that battle. We were in a little hamlet called Tuong Do, and as we moved forward, we were hit with an enemy counterattack, and we found out that we were not only being hit from the front, the friendly unit on our left, which was supposed to support us, had withdrawn, and we were taking fire from that side too. And in order to save what was left, we had to conduct a tactical withdrawal. So I ordered that to happen, and I ordered to bring only the wounded and leave the dead. We'd come back for them later. John Malnar, as we pulled back, stayed in a forward position, and he was killed by enemy fire. He stayed to make sure that all of our wounded were pulled back. That's how John Malnar died. I think that the thought for today should be we remember them. We remember John Malnar. Eventually we had a building named in his honor at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. We have a leadership award that's given every year to the current NCO in the 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, active duty, and that personifies the same principles of leadership and valor that John Malnar personified. And if you will bear with me just a moment, I want to read just one thing. It's a prayer that we say at every one of our reunions for all who went on before us, most appropriate here at this beautiful cemetery. At the rising of the sun and its going down, we remember them. At the blowing of the wind and the chill of the winter, we remember them. At the opening of the buds and the rebirth of spring, we remember them. At the rustling of the leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember them. At the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember them. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember them. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember them. When the thunder claps and we instead hear the roar of enemy guns, we remember them. As long as we live and as long as America stands for freedom, they too will live, for they are now part of us as we remember them.
Okay, Commissioner Hirschfeld, Congressman Russell, General Weiss, ask you to please join me here on this small stage. I'm going to give you the USPTO Military Association's Man in the Arena Award. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat.